And when it's time to troubleshoot a problem with a connecting client, such as an interface, the best place to do this, to start anyway, is to go into Operation, Network Manager Statistics, and you can take a look at all the different things that are currently connected to this Pi server. So for example, if I double click on this, this shows me that ICU, the Interface Configuration Utility, is currently connected from my different node. If I go into connection here, I can see the node. That's the IP address. It's actually connected from over here. This is my interface node. This node, as you can see, I'm running ICU. So that's fairly helpful. It shows me all kinds of information about this, and especially it can be useful for troubleshooting interfaces. So for example, here's the OPC interface, and as you can see, the OPC interface is connected from that same computer. If I look at connection, I can see that right here. And it shows me some other things that are very, very useful. It tells me that the way that this connected was with a trust connection. As you can see, the trust connection is the one that's highlighted here, and it tells me that it's associated, this interface, with that identity in Pi. And there's some other things that you'll see here as well. You know, the number of bytes we've sent and received, specifics about the host name, etc. Anyway, the point of showing you this is because this is a great way to figure out, you know, if you know how the connections are supposed to work, it's a great way to figure out what's connected and what's not. Now, there is one problem that you may have noticed already. Notice I've got two copies of the interface that are currently connected. One from back on the 9th, and if I go down here, I'll see the next one. Yeah, see, this is the next one for that OPC interface. This one was from the 10th. Two copies of that, but you may have noticed back here on ICU, actually the interface isn't even running right now. So if I were to go ahead and start up a third copy, or start this up, I'll probably get a third copy. We call those dead connections. Sometimes these dead connections will kind of sit around in this network statistics. It's not a big deal, it's just something to be aware of. Now watch what happens when I go ahead and switch over to my interface node. I'm going to start up the interface. That should start up yet another one of these connections. And also, because the interface is dependent on BufServ, it's going to start up BufServ, and that should show up in this list as well. Okay, let's do that. I'm in here. I'm going to go ahead and start this up. It's going to remind me that we have to start up BufServ, so we'll go ahead and start that up first. Let's real quick jump back over here. I'll go ahead and click on Refresh. And as you can see, there's a couple of new things on here. Here's that buffering subsystem, and here's the, I guess, the third instance of that OPC interface. Remember, these two are dead connections. But let's take a look at this. It tells me again that this connected using a trust. That's the trust name, which maps it to that identity. And the connection just happened just a second ago. Now, compare that to this BuffSS. Now, remember, BuffSS is not using that same trust. So notice we list here a different trust. This is a trust in which we're specifying that this is joined based on the credentials in this trust called buffering trust, which is pointing us to that identity. And we can see the connection started at the same time as well. Now, all this information is available, plus more, if you just scroll over here. As I scroll over, you can see column by column the information about each of those connected clients. Now, let me demonstrate one more incoming connection. I'm going to go over here, and let's start up a copy of the Pi System Management Tools. You also find that under Program Files, Pi System. Anyway, I'll start this up, and I'll initiate a connection to the server. And by initiating that connection, what we should see is the connection show up over on the network management statistics, but also we'll find out how this was able to connect. So I'll go into File, Connections. I'm going to go ahead and establish that connection. It's going to attempt to connect. Now this is telling me that it's connected as virtual labs, and that's the same information we're going to see over here. Let me go ahead and refresh this. And now we have a new entry here. This is SMT host. That's System Management Tools. And if we double click on this, as you can see now, instead of connecting using a trust mechanism, this is using Windows Integrated Security. So this has identified the operating system user as the user called administrator within this domain called Virtual Labs. And that particular combination here is associated with piadmins as a group. Now that is handled through identities. Let me explain that again. If we go back into security and we look at identities, there is within here a group called piadmins, and you'll find there's been a mapping that maps that user, Virtual Labs Administrator, to that identity. So that's how he becomes, that Windows user becomes a member of what we're calling the admins group. And we saw that show up over here. See, he's being logged in as the piadmins group. Now, in earlier videos, we had taken a look in some real detail at these message logs. The connections that you see here, are the incoming connections, they can be very obscure. Let me make this a little bigger so that we can see some of these. Yeah, so for example, this is an example right here of this SMT host when it initially connected, etc. So how do you interpret what we're looking at in this message log? Well, if you remember how this connection works in general, let me go ahead and close this for a second. If you look at file connections, if you recall, if we go into Tools, Options, we can see right here in this application that the protocols we're going to use, and the order of this protocol is going to be, we're going to first check against Windows security to see if somebody connecting a client connects using that. If that fails, we go on to the PyTrust, and if that fails, we go on to the regular user. Now, if you know this sequence, it helps to explain what you see in the message logs. And if you take a look at the message logs shown in your book, this is a message log of an unsuccessful attempt, you can see exactly the sequence that we're following. Here, let me just highlight here. See, in this particular sequence, we see that the first thing we tried to do was to do a regular login using Windows login here, but that was unsuccessful. There was no identity mapped to that particular Windows user. Now, the second thing we did was we tried to see if there was a trust. We did that second check, and as you can see here, we're getting a message saying there's no trust relation for this request, so that fails. And then the third thing we try to do is we try to log in using the default user that's configured with that connection. And the default user was piadmin in this case. And in this case, they did not have access. They didn't provide the proper password or whatever. So that failed as well. So as you can see, by taking a look and understanding this sequence right here, it helps you to understand a little bit better what's going on in that message log. And by the way, when it said the default user, what we were talking about there is the default user that we were specified right here in that connection. Now, one last thing that might help explain what you see in those message logs is if you understand what the connection credentials are that we're receiving from that client. So let me show you a nice little utility on the interface node that you can run. So I'm in the interface node here. I'm going to just run the command prompt. I'm going to change to my pypc/adm directory. So this is under Program Files. It's under pypc/adm. And it's a file called, well, there's not much in here. I can just look at everything. It's a file called pidiag. Pidiag has a -host switch that you can pass to it. And what pidiag-host does is it shows us all those credentials that normally we would get from the connecting client. So for example, this tells me what the domain is. This particular computer is in the domain called Virtual Labs. This is the name of the machine, this machine name right here. The user I'm currently logged in as administrator. This is its IP address, fully qualified domain name. All this kind of stuff is fairly useful in doing some troubleshooting. So now when you're looking at your message log, you can know exactly what messages to be looking for this particular computer.